I'm going to show you how to repair some jeans. These jeans look okay, they don't look too bad. Until you sit down. That knee needs repairing. And the other one's going the same way, so we're going to get these in the sewing room and we'll get them fixed. Here's our ingredients for doing these jeans. As you've already seen, it's the knee that's failed on them. They've got a little bit of wear elsewhere as well, as is to be expected. The other thing that we're using is a second pair of jeans that was so worn out we couldn't actually repair them. But that's good because that donates some material for repairing these and any other jeans we need to do in the future. I've already cut out the bottom of the spare pair of jeans. This is actually the leg. So that's the bit your foot goes through. And then this is the actual trouser leg. So this is what we would use to get the material to repair a pair of jeans. The closer the match the better, although sometimes a higher contrast colour can work quite nicely on this. Once you've unpicked this seam down here, which is your simple seam, because on jeans you have one seam that's just a very plain seam, and then your other seam is the more complicated sort of rolled over French seam. And you look on the inside, you can see that simple seam is just your two halves of the fabric that have been overlocked and then just a plain seam put down the middle. Whereas the other seam, the pieces have been overlocked and you've got two lines of stitching. It's quite difficult to unpick that side, so leave that side alone if you can. Always unpick this side because that's much easier. You just get a pair of scissors and you chop through perhaps a little bit more than that. Chop through a couple of stitches and then okay, this one's being stubborn. Chop through a few stitches and then grab the seam and just pull. On this fabric it's quite worn, so this has actually torn. If you're doing it and it's something you're saving, snip through the stitches, but for our purposes that is perfectly fine because this is donor material. Once you've done that, you then cut out a section and that's going to be your repair. And here's one I prepared earlier. So I'm going to show you how this is done, because this isn't just a case of getting your fabric and sewing it on top. If you try and do that, you've got the problem, how do you not sew the front to the back? So we're going to go through and I will show you my method for doing this. You can use different fabrics, you can get fancy with embroidery, you can do whatever you want. This is just a basic pair of work trousers, or is now anyway, and this is just to reinforce the knees, to get a bit more life out of them for maybe another year or two, unless something else fails on them that can't be repaired, and it saves you spending a bit more money. It's like recycling, I suppose. So we've identified the damage on the jeans that we want to repair, and we've got our material to actually do the repair itself, and the next thing you need to do is actually repair the jeans before you take them apart to repair the jeans. The first knee patch that I've already done, the fabric was just thin, it hadn't yet gone through, so that was a little bit easier than this side. This side, as you can see, the fabric has gone through completely, so we need to stabilise that first, because otherwise when you remove this seam here, you may find that that tear gets worse or the fabric deforms. So the first thing we do is we stabilise it by doing some darning. The goal with darning isn't to actually make a seam that's thick on here. You want the fabric to be flat. This is why you darn socks, because the last thing you want is a seam ridge right across the bottom of your foot. It's really uncomfortable. So the goal really is to catch all of these threads here, which are still intact, and basically replace the blue thread that's missing, which goes in the opposite direction. But we don't have to be very beautiful with this, this is just functional. As you would with any other kind of stitch to start off with, you can either double your thread in the needle so you have a loop, or as I'm doing, because I'm using a slightly thicker thread on this one, you just leave a small tail, go back through, and then go through your loop there and pull that tight. Do that just twice, then you're not going to have this end come undone. Then you go through your fabric and you want to put your needle underneath these white threads because you want to keep them out of the way of the leg side, like your leg when you're wearing the jeans. And you bring the thread through, so you've gone from the top side underneath these threads and then come out through the other side of the tear. You then bring your thread back to the top side and repeat. This bit's important. When you pull this thread, don't pull it too tight. All you're doing is bridging the fabric. If you pull this really, really tight, you're going to end up with this making a ridge, which you don't want. So it's a fairly coarse stitch, this one, and it's just for stabilising the fabric. When you put the patch on, that will do all the work of stopping this getting any worse. Make sure as well when you put your stitches through, you can see on the edge the fabric's slightly frayed and your stitches want to be behind the point where it's starting to fray. That will make sure that your stitches don't just pull out straight away. You can darn this with any number of threads that you like. I'm using, which one is it? It's a Gutermann thread, which is very nice, and it is that number. I usually use this for buttonholes and buttons, as it's a very versatile thread for that sort of thing. It's very strong. Sometimes you'll get a bit of a tangle on your thread. When you actually pull the thread through, if you feel it's starting to resist, because you're not using any tension here, you shouldn't really have any problems, but if you do start to feel it resist, stop and have a look where the tangle is. A lot of the time it's just that the thread's twisted on itself, and all you need to do is take your time, try and find the loose loop, because a lot of the time it's just like a loop of thread and then it's kind of gone round itself and made a slip knot sort of a thing. And if you can find the loose loop, you can normally just unravel it and carry on. If I wasn't patching, then this stitch wouldn't be suitable for repairing a knee on a jean. You would want to use probably something like a blanket stitch or a herringbone stitch maybe, something that would keep things flatter. Unless you're in a rush and you don't care, in which case do whatever you want. Whatever works. Let's do it again. Funny, normally this thread's very well behaved. It gets a little trickier as you get towards the end of the seam. Once you get to the last little kind of tuft of the tear, that's when you can think about tying off. Much the same as when you started the seam, all you do is go through the fabric, and this time instead of a tail you're leaving a loop, and you go through the loop a couple of times, and that finishes off this part of the repair. Now, for some people that would be fine as a repair, and in an emergency, yeah, that's fine. But we're going to go a little bit further. The other thing, when I was saying that the thread tangles, if you watch, you can see how it just does that. And then the problem is, as you're sewing, it sort of doubles back on itself and twists. One way you can solve it is pick up the fabric and leave the thread hanging, let go of the needle, and it just untwists itself. So if you've got a really problematic piece, that then cures it, because then, as you can see, it doesn't want to twist back on itself. Just keep an eye on where your needle is when you do that, because sometimes the needle falls straight off the thread. Right, now that bit's done, we will do the next stage, which is taking the leg apart, which is fairly easy. Unlike the donor fabric, I'm not going to tear this. I'm actually going to use the scissors to go through the thread. On jeans, at the bottom, particularly on Levi's, you have a contrast stitching. Now, some people are better than others at putting this contrast stitching in. The biggest issue is matching the colour, matching the stitch lengths. I'm not very good at it, so I choose to leave this section in place. It's strong enough, it's not affecting the repair that we're doing, and it's not going to get in our way. Our repair is up here at the knee, and when you repair a section like that, you can do quite a narrow strip here. I prefer to make it quite wide, because when you look at a pair of jeans that's been worn for a while, you can just see with the wrinkles here, it stretches sort of this area. So that's where your reinforcement needs to go. If you just put a thin strip there, chances are it's going to go either side of that strip, and then you're going to have to do it again. So by putting a larger patch on, it's stronger for a longer amount of time. Remember, we're going for the inside leg seam because that's the simpler one. And if you put a bit of tension on, you can see where the stitches pull. And what you want to do is go in with your scissors and try and pick up a thread and just snip a thread, but not the fabric. It's quite tricky to show you on the camera, but once you've got that one thread, when you put some tension under it, you can see where the rest of the threads are. So we're leaving this section as it is. We're starting quite low down the leg. The reason for this is it makes it easier to do the seam afterwards. Pointy scissors are best for this. I use these ones, which are actually manicure scissors, but they're not very good for cutting nails. They're great for taking threads out for some reason. And with a pair of jeans that's been worn a while, the seam's nicely pressed, so the fabric's not in your way. And you just work your way along, snipping the thread. And when you can actually start to get your fingers in the gap and put some tension on, that makes your life a lot easier, because as you go, it makes the stitches appear. Levi's are quite well made, so if they're cheaper jeans, they do tend to come apart a bit easier than this. I've also found thread rippers don't work very well on these kind of jeans. They work great on trousers and other lightweight clothing, but on jeans, particularly heavier weight ones like these, I found you have to just be a bit slow. Once you've got a few, you can get your hand in. And I use finger and thumb one side, and then use my little finger and my ring finger to actually just spread the fabric, and then my middle finger I can support the seam as I'm going. It's, until you get the hang of it, it's quite a weird feel, but I found it's the best way of seeing where I'm going and popping a seam like this. As I get nearer to the damage, the actual thread on the seam isn't quite as strong, and that's probably because it's had less wear and tear on it. Sorry, it's had more wear and tear on it than the lower end of the seam. Here we are, this is the quick repair that we did, and this is why you do it, because as you're putting tension on here, if we hadn't sewn this up, there's a chance that this would have torn right across, and then you just end up with the risk of having a lot more work getting everything to line up and behave. This way you've stabilised it, and when you come to sewing it back together on the machine, you've still got the seam intact on the inside. And we're going to go up far enough. We're not going to all the way to the top, we're just going far enough that we can put the patch in. You want to make sure when you pop this seam that it's a longer gap than the patch you're putting in. And I think that will do us. You've got the stitching for the pocket here, the reinforcement section, which is in a different colour. And you come down a little way and you've got where we've opened the seam. So that's the entire leg seam opened up. And the reason that we do that is it allows you to then fold the leg out flat, and that makes putting the new patch in a lot easier. And your patch will go on there. So I will just set this up to show you a bit better, and we'll get this done. Depending on your personal preference, the next thing to do is figure out where you want both of the knee patches to be. The first one to do was quite easy. I could see where the fabric was bad, I knew which area I wanted to cover, and that determined where it's going to go. The second one, you can either choose to just patch the area that you're interested in, or, as we've done here, you can take some time and make sure that they're equal. This then makes it look deliberate and less like a repair. As you can see, I've got 2 pins, and these are the marker points for where this patch goes. And what I did was I took the cuff of each leg down here and measured up the seam equal amount and put a pin in for the bottom, and then went up, pin in for the top. And when it comes to putting this patch in, I folded what my seam allowances are going to be first, so it matched this on both sides. To sew the patch in, we actually sew along this side, and because we haven't split this seam, it's going to be sewn in back to front, and then you fold it over. Then you'll sew the top and the bottom line there, and then this edge will be caught in the seam that we opened. And as you can see, it completely covers up this repair here, and when it's in, you'll find that both patches match. You can use contrast stitching and all kinds of things. Because the trouser leg opens up basically flat, it allows you quite a bit of freedom on how you go about doing this repair. So I'm going to sew this down, take these pins out because I don't need those two now, and we'll come back when that's in. When it comes to sewing the patch in, as you've just seen there, it can help just to thread the leg that you're not doing through the bridge of the machine first. Also be sure that on your seams, on the jeans you've got the seam folded out there, and on your patch it's just the rolled over hem that's folded in, it's not the original seam if you're using that. This will help later. There we go, that's the top seam. The bottom one's a bit easier because you haven't got that fabric at the top of the leg getting in your way. Also be sure as you're sewing that you're keeping an eye on this side of the leg. You don't want it to get caught up underneath. So just keep checking every now and then that you've got everything nice and flat. Just do a couple of reverse stitches at the end. This just means that you've got nice strong corners on your patch. Don't worry about snipping any of these threads, you can do that when you've got everything sewn in. Right, so that is the patch sewn in place. So now what we do is we turn the whole leg inside out, pin the long seam that you unpicked to begin with, this long thing here, and just run a line of stitches all the way up, and the only thing after that will be a press and a wash, because that will help the jeans get back into a better shape. So I'm not going to bore you just sewing a single straight seam. I'm going to do that and then we'll come back when these are all finished and back together. All the loose threads are clipped. Everything's inside out still at the moment. So the last thing we're going to deal with is this edge here, which is the patch itself. It's slightly long. My overlocker, or serger, isn't actually working at the moment. It needs a little bit of repair. So I can't overlock this edge. What I can do is I have this red box. And inside this red box are these amazing things. These are pinking shears. And these, I don't understand how it works, it just does. These stop fabric from fraying. All you do is you quite literally just chop the edge off. I'm just going to move the camera because then you can't really see properly at the moment. So if you can't get yourself a serger, you can get them second hand, but if you can't, pinking shears are the next best thing. But for goodness sake, get the best quality ones you can. If you get the cheaper ones, they just don't work that well. And all we do is we want to take off not the original fabric, because you've got the two parts of the original jeans and then you've got your patch repair here. So you're only taking out the patch repair piece, and all you do is use the pinking shears and just cut along that excess fabric. And it leaves you with a pinked edge, which are these little tiny triangles. And for some reason, that then doesn't fray. Or if it does fray, it's very, very minimal. And I love them. They're great. They're really, really useful. So that is these jeans now repaired. Let's pull them the right way out. And that there is one patch repair and a thread I've missed. Oh, if you have loose threads on clothes, never, ever, ever pull them. Ever. Snip them off, or if it's synthetic fabric, use a little bit of fire, a lighter or something like that, and just melt the end. Never pull it, you'll end up just making things worse. So, our next job, as you can see on this seam here, it's a little bit poofy looking. So we're going to press these seams nice and flat, and then these jeans will go through the wash, because that will help all of the fabric dry and shrink and do all the things that denim does evenly, and it'll make the repair look more deliberate. Just set these up on the chair before I go and press them, and then you'll see what they look like. There we go. 2 knee patches, and they don't look that strange. And when they're on, they look like there's some sort of design statement. Right, let's press them and then we'll get them on a person and you'll see how they actually look properly rather than on my chair.
Here we are, back in the garden, and you can see they look like fairly ordinary jeans. I'm told they're very comfortable. There's no problems with the tear on the inside and how that's repaired. And Pat's very happy that he can now get a bit more wear out of these Levi's. No more gaping tear in the knee when he sits down. It's all perfectly as it should be. If you do this on good jeans to start with, and you leave the top seam open, you can actually put knee pads in. So if you want to modify some jeans to make them more comfortable, that's quite a good idea. Thanks for watching. See you next time.